Thank you for that introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you. I am completely humbled to ask to speak before the faculty and adjunct at San Juan College. It's definitely been a lifetime goal to get to a point where you can speak to your colleagues and people that you look up to. I know there's some teachers, adjunct teachers, who actually taught me in middle school here in Farmington. So for example, Vicky Whitaker, if she's on, but she always gives me a hard time. But again, I do appreciate the opportunity, Janet, for you, I guess, asking me to talk. So let me share my screen. I do have a presentation, and I think a lot of the work that's been going on. The title of this is Teaching from an Equity, Culturally Responsive, and Student-Centered Perspective. Okay. First of all, let me just introduce myself in Navajo. Tkachini Nishla, Kitlachini Bashish Chin means this is who I'm born for. Nishla means this is my mom's clan. Tohigini Dashanella, those are my dad's dad. Ashie Dashiche, that's my mom's dad. Okay, so that's kind of how we identify ourselves in Navajo. And I saw Aaron Gokul did a awareness of what tribal lands we are near earlier on the presentation. And I just wanted really quickly to give a shout out to some of the other speakers, Karen, Carrie, Dawn, and then I think Karen twice, because a lot of the content that they talked about within their presentations are built into this presentation that I'm going to talk about. But this is who I am, and I think that's something that's really important. In Karen's presentation, she talked a lot about autonomy, like who we are as people, right? Who we are individually. And in Navajo, Steve Darden years ago came up with the 5-finger Navajo teaching. And the 5-finger, whenever you think about it, your thumb, we call that shit. Shit, that's me. And then the 4 are the 4 elements around us. On the left side is shit again, and there's 4 items around us that help us teach. I don't remember those teachings, but I just want to talk about that and kind of relate it to Karen's presentation on self-determination. Okay. So this is who I am, just to give you all context. I don't know. I know some of you in here, but I was raised in this hogan in Lukachigai, Arizona. As you can tell, I'm 6'1", so it's a lot shorter than me to get into that building. It is a dirt floor hogan. And the reason I talk about this is because when we think about culture, we have to think about the perspectives of our students, okay? Dirt floor hogan. This hogan, my dad and his uncles built it for when my mom and dad got married. Okay, so there's a lot of context within this. A year ago, our youngest, Marley, had her kinalta, and it was in a hogan that is very similar to this one, right? There's a lot of cultural teachings that we see in that. Whenever Vernon shared his picture earlier, right, that kind of reminded me of a hogan with those stacked rocks, okay, kind of building a shelter. And if you think about that, those are teachings that people have with them, right? And we'll get into a little bit more of that. But just to talk a little bit more about this is, whenever I was going through school, back in the 80s, a lot of times I felt like who I was as a Navajo person wasn't necessarily validated or utilized as a teaching tool or as a point of reference. Okay, so just to set the context, when I was in first grade, I was diagnosed as a student with disability. I had a specific learning disability in reading, and I also was diagnosed with ADHD. Okay. Not only that, but a lot of times when people saw me and saw where I came from, they thought I came from poverty because I have a dirt roof, hogan, and dirt floor, right? So people had these preconceived notions of who I was as a person. But just to set that context, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about, I feel equity, culturally responsive teaching, and student-centered teaching allowed me to thrive and develop as a person to get to the point where I'm presenting to some very and highly educated people on this platform. Okay. So this is my family. Carrie spoke earlier. She's kind of my background and my support. And like I commented in Karen's presentation, that family support, who we do it for. I was raised to do things for a family, right? So I do it for these four people that are standing beside me. We do have a blended family. We have a ours, yours, or yours, mine, and ours. Okay, so we have a blended family. So we bring that perspective to this world and to where we are as people. Okay. So these are all the schools I attended. Out of high school, I initially went to Fort Lewis. However, I was put on academic probation because of not necessarily being engaged. In the research, you see that a lot of natives end up returning home. Well, I didn't return home because, I was very, like Chris had said, I was very driven and always pushed to do the best I can. So I actually worked in Durango, managed several businesses, hotels, and restaurants up there without it. Here's the thing, without a degree. I ended up going back to Pueblo Community College, and I ended up getting my AA at Pueblo Community College. And I tell you what, this is one thing that I really like that is unique about the community college, is that the amount of attention, class sizes, and the amount of support that a small institution provides students, because it allowed me to develop my understanding of the world around me. Kind of like what Karen had said, you're looking at yourself and you're trying to expand outwards. Okay, and I really thrived at Pueblo Community College and getting my first 2 years of credits done there. I ended up going back to Fort Lewis College and getting a degree. I also attended the University of Illinois, okay, in Urbana-Champaign. This was actually prior to going to Fort Lewis, but in addition, after I had graduated with an accounting degree, I moved to Milwaukee. And while I was there, I was actually working in a car dealership as an accountant, and just really I didn't feel fulfilled. Didn't feel like I was making an impact. Okay, so I ended up. A colleague of mine said, hey, Deswood, there's an Indian school right over here by Marquette. So he got me plugged in there. I went and I interviewed. I was in a suit and tie, and the principal was like, we rarely have Native Americans walking into our door asking for a job. Not only that, that's educated. So quickly, just snap of a finger, he walked me right down to the HR office, and then that was my journey, my beginning to education. While I was at the Indian Community School of Milwaukee, they had a urban Indian teacher training program, which was funded by the Department of Education, more specifically the Bureau of Indian Education. So there was a grant that was written called Urban American Indian Teacher Training Program, and that was how I was able to get into the field of education. So once that happened, moved back to Farmington area, taught, and that's how it said I taught in Tohatchee as well. I taught out in Tohatchee for a couple of years, and then maybe a few years later, Carrie and we moved to Pennsylvania, and we got our master's degree. When I came back, simultaneously working on my doctorate and at Grand Canyon, I actually was going and getting my TESOL endorsement simultaneously, so that I had that TESOL endorsement. I'm all but dissertation right now. I wrote my 113 pages of my dissertation. Carrie keeps pushing me to get done, but I tell you what, I had my father pass away a couple years ago, and I lost that motivation. I had kind of lost that fire to get done. Okay, so this is a little bit about me, because the reason why I talk about this is because we all have this story. We all bring a unique story to the classroom, right? And it was allowing me to share my story with people, allowing me to share that I was a sheep herder, allowing me to share that I raise cattle, and I know how to weld, and I know how to drive a tractor. In fact, the first vehicle I drove was a tractor. Okay. But allowing me to share that story of who I am within the classroom, right? Bringing that community, bringing this group long lineage with me into this classroom. I think about that because if we have our students that are Latinx, they have a story for how they came here, right? And that's what we need to bring out. We need to bring that story out and have them talk about it and have them relate to the experience of an educational system that came from Europe, right? That's well documented. The history books talk about that story of how we are learning within an educational system that comes from Europe. And you know, there's a culmination of a lot of different cultures that make that. But that's one of the reasons why I talk about this, because going through a TESOL program, this is one of the first activities we had to do, was telling our story. But you know, a lot of times in education, elementary, middle schools, they talk about culture quilts, okay? Because you know, that's one thing that's really unique about these states that we look at. You know, we're a bunch of groups of people that are coming together to create more, to create better, okay? So moving forward, also, hey, I want to say, I want to mention one more thing. You know, not only working with Native and Latinx students here in Farmington, when I was in Milwaukee, I worked with a plethora of cultures: Hmong, Cuban, some different students that were from Angola, Africa, Dominican, right? Very, very culturally rich community that I taught it, and just bringing that into classrooms. Okay, that's kind of the perspective I'm bringing with me to this presentation. That's why earlier I said it's been a lifelong journey to get to this point right where I'm at. Okay, so the roles I serve within the community, again, like Chris said, I am the principal of Rocinante High School. I do adjunct at Diné College and at San Juan College. I'm actually currently teaching a elementary science methods course at Diné College. Like Chris said, I'm the board chair of that large farm south of Farmington, Navajo Pride. You know, that's, so I bring that perspective with me into a lot of the stuff that I do, even at Rocinante. We work with NAPI, and you know, we take our students up there. We bring them to our job fair. Also a business owner, and then a podcaster. I've interviewed almost 150 different Native people to hear their stories, and I think that's part of it, is hearing people's stories, hearing what they have, hearing their trials and their tribulations of where they've come from, what they've overcome. And I think that's one thing that's unique. I don't know if it's just being empathetic or trying to understand people, but you know, that's one thing I really try to do. So I have a question for everybody, and please put it in the chat box. Why do we need to use equity, culturally responsive strategies, and student-centered approaches to teach students? Okay, so go ahead and answer that question and put it in the comment box. Let me see if I can find trying to find where the comments are. Okay, here we go. Okay, some of the comments. So we can understand the many perspectives. It's our responsibility as educators. Different backgrounds and experiences provide a guideline for conduct. Okay, everybody learns different, and differences mostly come from their background and experience. Good, these are really good comments. These are really good reasons. Okay, I'll let it go for about one more minute. And I saw someone put this: help myself grow and connect with others. That's a really good point. I like that. I like that. Students deserve a chance to learn, and what they want to learn. We have to understand them, to teach them. That's a really good point. Okay. All right. We'll do 15 more seconds. Wow, these are really good responses. Because we care. Absolutely. That's really deep right there. Because we care. Each and every one of our students is unique. That is, yes, that is another really good response. Okay, so those are all some really good responses. Fury's model of education. Yes, that is so true. I remember reading Fury in in grad school and undergrad as well. Okay, so those are some really good reasons. Now, one of the things that I always start with each year with my staff is the why. Right? Why do we do this? Right? If you've seen the TED Talk where the gentleman's talking about you got to start with the why, otherwise the what and the how never fall into place. Okay, I think that's important. A lot of times leaders forget to talk about the why we do this, why is it relevant. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start with this, because if we don't understand the why, the other two don't fall into place. Okay, so I have another question. Can equity, culturally responsiveness, and student-centered teaching overlap? Okay, can they overlap? So this is a yes, no, maybe question. Go ahead and put that in the comment box as well. Can they overlap? Do they overlap? Imagine a Venn diagram. Yes, yes, yes. I'm reading these comments and they're all a bunch of yeses, a bunch of yeses. Yes, they overlap. Okay. And then yes, I think they're one and the same. You can't have one without the other, of course. Absolutely. Okay. Nice. I like that. Those are the amazing responses. Okay. So yes, we do see that and they do overlap. Okay. There is a lot of overlapping going on here. In fact, being an adjunct at San Juan College, I really appreciate some of the teachings that have been going on, some of the PD that's been offered, about uncovering our biases, because a lot of that impacts what we do within our classrooms. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed in the presentation, okay? So whenever we look at I know many of you have seen this picture or this image where we look at equality, right? The assumption is that everyone benefits from the same supports, okay? And then equity, everyone gets the supports they need. And then on the very right, justice, all three can see the same game without supports, the causes, okay? And I tell you what, when we talk about causes, right, that's one of the things we really try to do at Rocinante is we try to uncover the root causes for why our students aren't plugged in, why our students aren't learning, why our students aren't getting what they need out of being at our school, okay? So those causes, and I think that's, and I know we probably take that a little bit further than a lot of places, but it's important. It's important because, like Karen was talking about in her presentation, we start with us, right? I mean, that's why in Navajo we talk about she, meaning me, and then we expand out. And if you look at the pattern of Navajo thought, you start as a little one, and then you're starting to grow, and you're growing up, and you go through the life stages, and that's we talk about the cyclical nature in a lot of Native communities, and part of it is because there are things that we're picking up as we're going through this life, right? We're learning to new strategies, new concepts, and I think that was one of the comments I heard in one of the previous presentations was that if we're not reflecting on what we do, we can't improve, right? And if you looked at Karen's one of her diagrams, there was this chart that had arrows pointed on, and it talks about, in my eye, it reminded me the plan, do, study, and then act, and then going back through and making adjustments, which is honestly that's the change or improvement cycle. My doctoral work was in organizational theory and organizational development, but if you take that not only just as an organization but as individually, that's that improvement cycle. Okay. All right. So what is culturally responsive teaching? Again, this is Ladson Billings. It's an approach that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Okay, so again, I keep referring to Karen's presentation because they talked about teaching to the whole child or holistically teaching, and that's that environment, and that's what I was referring to when I started the presentation. I brought these different funds of knowledge in with me into the classroom. I had funds of knowledge, but they weren't the same funds of knowledge that our traditional Western education talks about, or also not only talks about but encourages. So I had differing funds of knowledge, and I was trying to blend them together, right? I was trying to blend them together, and I was trying to make meaning of what I already knew, right? I had been taught certain knowledge. And by the way, I forgot to mention this. My first language when I was growing up was Navajo. I could speak Navajo, and that was the way I communicated. So when I came into that classroom, not only was I Navajo, but I was also had that learning disability. But just bringing that into the classroom, I was bumping heads. There was a cultural clash that was going on there. Okay, but it's validating that fund of knowledge exists and is important. Okay, so here's DeCapu and Wintergerst. Culture acts as a filter or set of lenses through which we view and interpret the world around us. Right, each of you bring this lens with you. Right, the common area that we talk about and create more knowledge is within the classrooms at San Juan College or within your online Zoom, right? Just by me sitting in the previous two sessions, all I was doing was connecting the pre-existing schemas of knowledge. Schemas are these little pockets of information, and by sitting in Karen, Carrie, and Dawn's presentations, I'm these brain synapses and these arrows were starting to point in different directions, and that's why I was referring to this. In fact, I'm thinking I don't even have to do my presentation because these three amazing educators are already doing it. They're already doing what I'm going to talk about, right? I mean, they're talking about these little areas, and I know they come from different departments, but that's where we start to connect these forms of knowledge or funds of knowledge that I like to refer to. Okay, but that's what we look through. In fact, going from accounting and getting into education, I felt like I just took a pair of glasses and put them on my worldview, and now I knew IEP, now I knew CLT, now I knew all these acronyms, right? But that's the way as individuals we start to look at information. Okay, here again, Ladson Billings, students of color may become alienated from the school process because schooling often asks children to do something or someone other than who came or who they really are. It asks them to use language other than the one they came to school with. Okay, I automatically thought of me. I came into the school knowing Navajo. We have many students that come in knowing Spanish, right? Or whatever other language. When I taught in Milwaukee, a lot of the students that I worked with spoke Hmong, right? I had no idea what that was, but I had to learn it. I had to learn about my students that were Hmong. I had to learn about my various different Latin X cultures. I had to learn about the Black culture, right? There's all these funds of knowledge because each of us bring these funds of knowledge. Not only was I Navajo, but there are Navajos out there that aren't traditional, meaning their beliefs are traditional. There's also Navajos that believe in Christianity. There's also Navajos that believe in Native American church or follow that path, right? So even within one culture, there's subcultures that exist within it. Okay, it asks them to dismiss their community and cultural knowledge. It erases things that students hold dear. Okay, remember how I talked earlier about I was having a culture clash with what I brought in with me, and that's what those last two sentences said. Is saying it dismissed what I had. It devalued me as a person. It devalued my culture, my language, and my ancestors, right? Okay, and it erased it. It made me feel less than. In fact, I remember in 8th grade, like I remember feeling bad because I was brown, right? Because I saw in media everyone was Anglo, right? And it just devalued, and it didn't make me feel good as a person. In fact, I remember thinking in 8th grade, like I didn't want to be Navajo. But yet, as I grew older, I started realizing how important that culture is, how important who I was as a person, like knowing my grandmother's 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 was always Touchy, which was my first clan, or which is my first clan. Okay, so whenever this is one of the things that I really focus on with my staff and my students is I always call it teaching students to play the game, right? The hidden curriculum, the hidden values, the hidden beliefs, the gender roles, the notions of self, because they differ between groups of people, right? And a lot of times in Native communities, they say, "Oh, I think of myself within a community," right? And there's groups out there that think of me first, individual first, right? Right. So then you look at that top part, that ice top of that, the tip of that iceberg, and you see the language, right? We see these things, but again, one of the things that I really, really try to work with my staff on is trying to understand teaching or trying to teach kids to play the game. Because I mean, if you think about it, let me use this as an example. Our two youngest, Marley and Gabby, whenever they were growing up, they used to come with us, or they used to come with me to my classroom at Hermosa and help me set up, right? They used to help me set up. They used to sit down and they would play school. When I grow up, I was not playing school, right? I was outside playing in the dirt. I was outside digging ditches. I was outside chasing sheep. I was running in the mountains and hiking and collecting traditional herbs. I forgot to mention, I have both sides of my family, they're medicine people, right? I know songs for the Hajonja Bidjan, which is the beauty wear ceremony, which is the spin-off, or actually it's the same line of the Kinalta, which is the puberty ceremony for our Navajo um, girls when they become a woman. Okay, but that's what I'm talking about. Like, there's all of these components of us that are unique that people don't know. But as the educator, that's where we're starting. That's where we start to bring that out. We start to bring those. I mean, we tease it out of them, right? We pull it out because, one, like Karen was saying, this people have to feel comfortable with themselves. We have to create community within our classrooms, so then we can start to learn these little pieces of information. Okay, so I like to talk about this just because of the macro down to the micro, big picture to little picture. Okay, culturally competent environment. Education needs to be culturally competent and have the ability to dialogue and work across cultural groups. So there are three dimensions of cultural competence. There's institutional, personal, and then there's instructional. Okay, so policies and values that create the environment. This is at your administrative level. Then there's the personal. Earlier we talked about critical reflection, our attitudes and beliefs, and uncovering those biases. I mean, this is one thing. One of the things I've been working on a lot with my staff is uncovering biases with who we are, because we bring those biases and we try to put our glasses on our kids, right? Again, remember, dismissing their glasses that they already have, okay? But trying to find a combination of our glasses and their glasses. I guess that's a really good analogy to use, okay? Let's see. And then obviously instructionally, the materials, activities, and teaching strategies that meet the unique backgrounds of our students. And I think that's one of the things that I learned with my TESOL program, was that there are all of these strategies. There's a plethora of strategies in the research that tell us what is good, right? Karen, Carrie, and Dawn talked about assessment, using authentic assessment and how to assess, and using, whenever they were talking about that 4-point scale, the standards-based grading. I presented at a conference a couple years ago about standards-based grading, which is one of the things that the Farmington Municipal Schools does for the middle and elementary schools, and we're trying to do that at the high school level. But I won't talk too much about that because Aaron Gokul can probably do a better job about standards-based grading, but I do believe in that it's a really good assessment strategy. So I'm going to look at this from two perspectives, the leadership and then from the instructional level. So the leaders develop a cultural vision and they hold staff to that creative vision. Now, part of the reason why I talk about this is because in my leadership courses, one of the things they talked about that in organization, that I always say, what gets measured gets done, right? If we're not measuring, if the leadership is not measuring that teachers are doing these things, we're not going to be using equity, culturally responsive, or student-centered. Whenever I work with my teachers in my building, within the 4 domains that we assess our teachers or evaluate our teachers, these indicators are built in there, right? And part of that is because we do have a very diverse state. So the state on a higher level has made this a really important emphasis. And if you think about the Yazi Martinez case as well, right? A lot of these indicators are embedded within the framework. Okay, then on the instructor level, teach from culturally inclusive view. And one of the things I talk about includes being inclusive and inclusivity is because I know in Karen's presentation she talked about including, not being exclusive, but bringing people in. Right. Whenever I initially came into the education, went to kindergarten, first grade, my who I was not included. It was excluded. Right. And that's where it made me feel like I was less than. Okay. And then classroom language and behaviors that value differences. I when I was younger in my early 20s, I did some traveling and I went to Singapore and Malaysia. And they have 3 main languages there. They don't just have the main language isn't just English, right? Well, like us in the U.S., our only language that we say is the preferred language is as English. But in the country where I went when I was younger, it was English, Malay, and I believe Cantonese, I believe, but there were 3 main languages. I think there were the 3 official languages of the country, but that's valuing the diversity that exists within that country. But again, that classroom, we can do that within our classrooms as well. Creating a capacity for cultural self-assessment. Okay, so on the leadership side, assess developmental culture, ability to articulate cultural expectations. And then on the instructor side, assess classroom culture and impact on students, and then encourage students to discover their own culture. Okay. And this example right here below the instructor, this reminded me of a few years ago, Carrie wrote, I guess she got the distinguished teaching grant, I believe was what it was called. But she took a group of students and faculty down to a friend of ours, Dr. Larry Emerson's farm, and they did a teaching there, right? Teaching outside of the classroom, but into the community, right? Allowing students to develop who they are. Or the other thing too was inviting staff and faculty to be a part of that and growing their culture. Because if you think about that, and the reason why I say this is because when I had moved to Wisconsin, one of the things that I did was I immersed myself in the culture in Milwaukee, right? Which is one of the things I think whenever at least for me, when I move to places is to find out the norms, the practices of the community. But I learned about the 7 recognized tribes of Wisconsin. The learning outside of the classroom, but into the community. I remember going wild ricing. I remember learning how to make a birch bark house. There's these different things that I was exposed to within that community. But that's a really good example of cultural responsiveness. And I'll get into some of the strategies here in a bit. And then understanding the dynamics. Again, on the leadership side, help staff differentiate behavior problems versus cultural differences, and then training support, and then for conflict management. And then I look at that on the left side, and it reminds me of San Juan College valuing culture and diversity. Having Carrie do that class, that culture class, and also some of these trainings that I've been seeing that I've been getting from Janet, the emails that she sends out. Right, bringing the community that one book, right? I mean, years ago we hosted Chester Nez with the World War II, one of the code talkers at our house. Just bringing the surrounding culture into the community, into the school community, because that goes both ways, right? the focus of San Juan College is to be the community hub, right? To bring knowledge in and then to send knowledge out as well. So it's two ways. And then on the other side, as instructors, conflict as teachable moments. I mean, if you think about that, I always talk with my teachers when I'm evaluating. Did you seize the teachable moment, right? Were you flexible with your teaching so that you're able to adjust and use that teachable moment, because those are the most important moments, okay? And then teaching a variety of methods to resolve conflict, okay? So here's some, now I'm going to get into a little bit more of the specifics and some of the strategies. Again, welcome students by name as they enter the classroom, or the Zoom, since we're all virtual right now. But knowing students, knowing students, their background. Earlier, I saw one of the presentations was about doing a little bit of social and emotional care with our students. A lot of times with our students, we actually circle up. We have talking circles, right? We circle our kids up and we get to know our students. We have a system within our school. We call it the early warning system. And within there, we put all of our students in a list and we go through, do we know this kid? Do we know a personal story, right? Do we know any unique details about the kid? We have 3 columns, we fill them out. We go through every one of our students, all 220 of them, okay? Use eye contact with all students. Again, this will be a little bit appropriate because I do know some natives are a bit shy and they'll tilt their head down a little bit, but just being flexible. Actually, that was something I had noticed as well within the Hmong culture was, seeing students eye to eye, okay? Using proximity with all students equitably, moving around the room. That's one of the assessments that we do when evaluating teachers is, are they moving around or are they just standing still up at the front of the room, right? Are they moving around? And a lot of times, if you're moving around, the teachers or the students are looking at you, moving around. And not only that, but it's a really good discipline strategy as well, and to make sure that students are on task. And then body language, gestures, and expressions to convey a message that all students' question and opinions are important. I think that's one thing. We always, or at least in the research, it talks about that. Us speaking isn't the only type of communication, right? There's our nonverbal, there are our gestures. So understanding how that plays, in the classroom. Use the class building and team building activities to promote peer support. Now this is where I talk about when we circle our students up, because we do a lot of icebreakers to do this. And I know I've actually been in some classes on the, I hear feedback, sorry. On the grad level, or when you're involved in graduate work where you're sharing out a lot more, there's a lot more interaction. I know within my building, one of the things we always talk about, whoever's doing the talking is doing the learning, right? So then if you're allowing students to engage in the conversations, then they're more likely to learn, okay, be part of the process. All right. And then random response strategies, right? Cold calls, think, pair, share, and then, discuss. And then also cooperative learning structures, partners, small group, large group, whole group, small group. So there's different type of learning structures we can do. One of the things that we've been focusing on a lot the last couple of years is project-based learning, where students are engaged in creating soft skills while learning content. I know Carrie had talked about homogeneous grouping. So to be culturally responsive, it's heterogeneous grouping, okay? And this is so that students are learning, because I think learning is one thing that's nice about this is learning should be from multiple angles, not just the teacher giving students the direct information, but the teacher also actually learning from the students as well. And then use probing and clarifying techniques to assist students to answer questions. Acknowledge all students' comments, responses, questions, and contributions. So just acknowledging, validating. And I think a lot of times, if you think about it, we just want to be heard, right? We want our teachers to hear what we're saying. So just acknowledging, we heard you. That's a good comment. Well, hang on one second. Let's finish this one. We'll get back to your comment. Okay, so that's kind of an example. So whenever you think about this, right? Equity, culturally responsive practice. I got this out of the Wisconsin Response to Intervention. Okay, part of it is because, like I was saying, I got my teaching credential from Wisconsin. So a lot of the stuff, like if we look at our WIDA as well, which is Wisconsin. I can't remember what WIDA stands for, but it's how we engage our ELL students, our English language learners. But again, desire to lead with the will, right? To me, that's the why. To gain cultural knowledge, learning about our students, and then applying the knowledge. So if you look at those a little bit more in depth, become, examine, believe, understand, know, lead, accept, and then use. All right. And this is one of the culturally responsive wheels. Okay, to lead to increase awareness and to use this to guide your teaching. Again, culturally responsive. I just had a bunch of words, and I'm like, oh man, I need some graphics. So I had pulled in some graphics to the presentation. Seeks multiple perspectives. Okay, a lot of when I used to teach history as well when I was in middle school, and we used to have debates quite often. We break up into 2 or 3 groups and have my students come up with their to defend a point, right? Their position, and then we have a debate. And I actually had one student that just emailed me a year ago, and he said that he got a debate scholarship to Eastern New Mexico, and he sent me an email thanking me for getting him to debate in the classroom, because he ended up going to Farmington High and he joined the debate club. But I mean, that's just an example of the effect of it. Okay. Multiple approaches to consistently monitor students' understanding. And I think this one was really well covered in Karen, Carrie, and Don's presentation earlier, right? Using formative and summative assessments to guide teaching. And in the K-12 setting, we talk about this using our formative assessment and our summative as our way, as a indicator to provide interventions, right? Our tier 1 interventions, which are our whole group, then our tier 2, which is our small group, and obviously your tier 3 are your students with disabilities, or making adaptations for maybe someone that has a hearing impairment, but using those approaches, various approaches, to provide feedback. Okay, identifies current knowledge before instruction. And this is, to me, like, I think of that, and it reminds me of using a KWL chart, right? What do you know? What do you want to know? And what did you learn, right? As a way to looking at what a student might know, assessing their prior knowledge before teaching. I feel a lot of times we assume students don't know stuff, right? So we teach them, and a lot of times, years ago, I had worked with, I had taught Algebra 1 in middle school, and that's one group that has a high dropout rate because one of them is because they're bored, right? They're not getting, teachers assume that they don't know enough information, but actually assessing them and seeing where they're at, what their level of skill and knowledge is, and then teaching from there. And in all honesty, like, it's almost individualizing to each of our students, because you can have a student that's gifted, or you can have a student that's on the lower end of the spectrum as well. And then real life experiences to connect to school learning. And I think this is one, I think it finally, I had a teacher that was I think I was in 4th or 5th grade at Animus, and I had a teacher realize that, my ADHD I was bouncing around everywhere. I was going from desk to desk teaching kids how to do math, which, by the way, was the one area that I was good at. If I was tested, I probably would have been gifted in math, because I had pretty high math score, which is why I ended up getting a degree in accounting, because I was good with numbers. But, I had one teacher that just let me, bounce around, and, hey, Peter, why don't you go do this? Peter, why don't you go that? Peter, can you go run to the office? Like, just understanding that, right? And to me, that's using those skills and understanding the experiences of each of your students, okay? So here's another wheel. And there's research that's also the research that are attached to these specific, I guess, frameworks, culturally responsive teaching, GAY, and their impact and their addition to culturally relevant education, okay, culturally responsive instruction, culturally sustaining pedagogy. I know Carrie mentioned something to me last night. I'm like, oh, I only know it as culturally responsive teaching or pedagogy, okay? Constructivism, right? Helping students make meaning of their knowledge, okay, or helping students construct based on what they already know, and with new information and new activities that we're providing them. And then multicultural education, critical pedagogy. I think someone mentioned Fury earlier, and then equity pedagogy. Thanks. Okay. And actually, it was pretty cool because when I was at UW Milwaukee, I had we did a lot. The focus of the teaching program was on urban equity. So a lot of the work I did at UW Milwaukee was based on equity and creating equitable grading practices, creating equitable instruction. So it was amazing to go through that program and see equity and incorporating equity into lesson plans as well, because it's definitely one of those things where you can see it visually, right, whenever you're looking at a lesson plan. So situating the learning environment, this is the actual, I guess, the physical space, arrange the classroom to accommodate discussion. At our school, we do talking circles. We actually clear all the desks or tables and we circle up and we talk. We talk. Actually, in all honesty, we do talking circles as for our staff meetings. You know, I go around the room and I ask staff for input. In fact, a year ago or 2 years ago, I went to this workshop, this training, and there's this gentleman that was Ojibwe from Wisconsin, and he said that whenever you traditionally our people, the Ojibwe people, he said they would line up from firstborn January 1st all the way up to December 31st, put them in order from birth dates. And then he said that what we would do is we would circle people up, and starting from whoever was born first, they would start adding to whatever the topic of discussion was. Each person would add to the discussion until it went all the way to the person born on December 31st, right? And their thought was, he was saying that the thought was that by allowing that to happen based on the quarter, month, or the seasons, each group has a unique fund of knowledge that I guess that the creator gave them. So it allowed the different forms of thought to be heard and to be validated and to be a part of the conversation, okay? Especially when decisions were being made, okay? But I was really fascinated with that approach because it really highlighted individual opinions to impact the larger context, a larger group, okay? And then this one, bulletin boards, displays, instructional materials, and visuals in the classroom reflect the racial and ethnic culture that is represented. I know when I had a math class, one of the things I would do is I would put people of color, right? Mathematicians, scientists, okay? Not only focusing just on male, but focusing on women, right? Making them because if you think about that, there's a bias there. In fact, when I taught a couple of weeks ago, we were on a section about inclusivity in science, and one of the activities I had my students do was, who do you think of whenever you hear of a scientist, right? And I think 9 out of the 10 students had identified a male, someone with a white coat, some glasses, bushy hair, right? Not one. Actually, one of them thought of I can't remember the scientist's name, but she had won a Nobel Peace Prize. But 9 out of 10 identified a male, right? But understanding that there are other, and identifying that, recognizing that there are female scientists within that field as well. But it was a really interesting activity to do. And then lastly on that, display and use materials means supplemental books that reflect all students' racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. I think one thing that San Juan College does a really good job of this, with the one book, one community, right? They have very diverse group of authors coming in and talking about books that can be used within the building or within the community. So I think that's one thing that this bullet reminded me of the effort that San Juan College does. Okay. Again, use a variety of visual aids and props to support student learning. Learn, use, and display some words in students' heritage or native language. Okay, whenever you go into a classroom where there's a multicultural, a bilingual, right? There'll be words in the various different languages that are most prevalent. For example, here, like if you go into an elementary, there's words in Navajo, for the different objects, and then or also in Spanish, right? So that's just being understanding of that. And I know it's a little bit harder to do that in higher ed because everyone moves classrooms. This is not my classroom, but there are ways to do it. Okay, and then model use of graphic organizers. Okay, I know a lot of times people use what do they call Cornell notes or Venn diagrams, T-charts, four squares. There's a lot of different ways to organize thoughts and ideas and to organize new information. Okay, I mean even a KWL chart. Okay, feedback strategies. I won't get too much into this because I think that was covered by the presentation earlier today. Because a lot of these Karen, Carrie, and Dawn talked about these in more detail for an hour. Okay, so I'll just leave that up there. Use wait time, ask students for feedback, provide students with criteria. Well, one thing I wanted to talk about actually with this third one is having students a part of the rubric design, right? Just a year ago, I had two teachers that did a cross-pollinated project-based learning unit, and the teachers they actually engaged the students to create the rubric for assessment. Okay, but being part of that process. Okay, and then showing exemplars. I tell you what, this is one that really fascinated me too. This is exemplars. So my students in my science methods class at Dana College, right? We ask students to write these papers that are in APA, right? But a lot of times we don't show them what that means. I actually had showed my students what the APA format. Now keep in mind they're only third year undergrads, but they didn't know. They didn't know. So assuming that they know how to do this, and in fact I got some feedback from them. Thanks for showing us. Like I didn't know what APA meant, and I was getting lower scores in my other classes. But I mean, if we're assuming that students know stuff, that's the biggest mistake that we can make, is assuming that they know. And a lot of times, when I work with my staff, if one of my teachers asks for clarification, that's an indicator to me that there's probably multiple others that might have this same issue. And I tell you what, part of being an administrator is teaching my teachers, right, to be better. And I think that's one thing that Karen really talked about earlier, was that if we don't have goals, right, we call them growth goals. We have a growth plan that we set up for our teachers. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure if San Juan College is that in depth with growth and becoming a learning organization. But I always refer to my building as we're learners, and I want to create a learning organization where we're constantly adding to what we're doing. And then lastly, give students effective, specific oral written feedback. Okay, and I think if we focus on growth, like the presentation earlier, right? Even if the deadline passes, right? There's always grade change forms. In fact, I just talked with a teacher in a meeting the other day that if a student understands and gains that knowledge that they need to be proficient, I mean, we can submit a grade change form, right? And I think that's what the group earlier was talking about. If we have a summative, if you're given summative assessment, adjusting that. If a student fails it, let them go back and retake it. Okay. Provide multiple opportunities. And this is what they had talked about, more in depth. explain and models positive self-talk. And I think if you think about this, right, I mean, you probably remember when your parents or your family or someone that read to you when you were little, right? They talked with you, they read a book with you, they explained how to go through this process. And a lot of times I feel we don't do that enough. We don't explain how to think through an essay, how to think critically whenever we're writing a reflective essay, or I call them article reflections, right? But we have to model that in, if you're looking from the ELL, I guess, perspective, they call that scaffolding the instruction, right? We're providing these students with supports. I know it sounds interesting for on the secondary level, but I mean, if we are true educators, we would scaffold, we would provide support for our kids. I mean, our oldest daughter, when she was going through NYU and Harvard, over here, 2,000 miles away, we're providing our daughter feedback and that support. And you know, I hear Carrie interacting with her students in her classes, and you know, providing them and nurturing that learning so that they are, you know, working above their zone of proximal development, and making learning a little bit and pushing them a little bit further. Okay. And then lastly, provide individual help to all students. Okay. And again, effective teaching is culturally responsive. It's having high expectations for all students, and then helping them achieve those expectations. Not only helping them, but showing them how to achieve. That's why earlier it talked about exemplars. You know, I didn't know what A work was, but I had a teacher in grad school that showed me what A quality work was. And then from there on, I was like, can we see an exemplar? Right? Students don't know what an exemplar is, but we have to show them. Here's what an A paper looks like. Here's what a B paper looks like. Here's what a C paper looks like. If you want to get credit, wherever you fall on there, because whenever you have a student that is not groomed or molded to understand and think like that, that's where we, as the educator, we go in and help our students think like, you know, think like an, how you say it, someone from academia. Okay. All right. Contribute to positive academic, attitudinal, and social outcomes for students. Use diverse resources. Contribute to the development of classrooms and schools that value diversity. Okay. I think that's a big one. Valuing, having a culture, having an institution that values that diversity and talks about it and brings people into the classrooms from the community or the different groups of people from within the community. Collaborate with colleagues, administrators, parents, and education professionals to ensure that students succeed. And, you know, serving on the board at NAPI, you know, I've been in meetings quite extensively with School of Energy, and, you know, trying to, you know, using their program and how the community can partner, you know, using their stakeholders, and leveraging the community resources to help the community grow. Because if San Juan College is successful, then the community is successful. If our local stakeholders, like you know, the businesses, the oil field, the wind and natural gas industry, you know, these different industries around us, if they're successful, you know, there's a two-way relationship that exists there. Okay, but just working and collaborating. Okay. So moving a little bit more towards learner-centric, if you look at those, a lot of those words, a lot of those types of learning, a lot of those strategies we've already talked about with equity. We've already talked about with culturally responsiveness. Okay. All right. But one key is, look at this: teacher mentor, right? Teacher student. These arrows are both ways. It's not just me, the person that knows all the information, you know, just giving them information, but getting and hearing their opinions as well, and bringing that in and adjusting and making meaning of it and connecting the dots for students, because we know the content, but we don't know what they know, but we got to try to build them up. Like, how many boxes do we need to put in underneath each of our students so that there's equity there? Okay. And a lot of these strategies are a way to do that. Okay. Student-centered learning strategies, again, cooperative learning, small grouped presentations, panel and experts, bringing them into the class so our students can ask questions. KWL, okay, whole class brainstorming sessions. I tell you what, this is one activity I do with my staff. You know, we just got done writing, and we actually were awarded with a $500,000 grant for a high school redesign. And as a staff, we wrote it, and we got these little sticky notes like this, and we put all these ideas and put them up on the wall, brainstorming. You know, no idea is a bad idea, and we just put them on the wall. I've seen this happen with students as well. Let's brainstorm, right? Create media around current issues such as public service announcements. I think this one area, I think, you know, engaging the community with podcasts, engaging the community with the community radio station, but teaching skills, communication skills, things of that nature. Discussions about issues where students can research and present as experts, okay? Making students the experts, teaching students to be experts. In fact, a few years ago at my high school, we had a DACA presentation, but it was a presentation of DACA, and then we also had the other side of it, right, where we had community members like the sheriff's department, the mayor, and all these groups of people talking about DACA and its impact on the community, both perspectives and how it impacts, right? But we had the students moderate. We had the students create these questions, but we taught them those skills. In fact, Scott Micklin worked with our student to moderate it, how to ask questions, how to take our questions and present it, when to ask those questions, okay? Allow students to work in small groups, assign roles to develop 21st century skills. Oftentimes we call these soft skills, right? And a lot of times, you know, those are those skills that we talk about that are hidden, right? The norms, how do we act? How do we act within a school building? Okay, and then case studies as well. And it's interesting though, because if you think about it, when you're in grad school or working on a PhD, like it's always case studies. And I'm not too sure, maybe that's something that needs to be looked at, but using case studies in undergrad, right? Maybe even high school, but using that because those are real life situations, okay? Jigsaws where students are divided and assigned tasks. Again, this is something that you see quite often in grad school, right? And then learning centers where students are doing various activities around the classroom. Okay. So this is one graphic that I really made an impact on me. Knowledge and experience that the teacher has, and just sharing. Notice it's one direction. This is teacher-centered learning. On the other side, student-centered. The teacher is a facilitator. Look at all these arrows, the knowledge, beliefs, and experiences of everyone. Okay, individual and collaborating students. Okay, so then there's a big difference between to me on the left side, it's very linear in one direction. Whenever you're looking on the right side, it's arrows are going every direction. Learning is going on. Students are learning from students. Students are learning from teachers learning from the students based on their beliefs, their knowledge, and their experiences. Okay, 8 things to look forward to in today's classroom. I saw this one. This is a really nice graphic as well. Voice, choice, time for reflection, opportunities for innovation, have students create things. I think this is one of the reasons why our high school redesign was centered around project-based learning, community service learning, and work-based learning, is because we want our students to experience real-world situations, not just simulations, but real-world situations, because they're learning to play the game. We're teaching them to play the professional game, how to act as a professional, how to dress when you go to an interview, how to dress when what questions, how to respond in whenever you're being interviewed. But I mean, those are some things that we really look at. So whenever I see opportunities for innovation, that's what it reminds me of. Because what does that lead to? We're developing critical thinkers, right? Where we're coupling the knowledge we have, the knowledge they have, so that our students can think critically. Not only that, but they're problem solvers. right? I mean, I think that's one thing in Karen's presentation where you're talking about goals, and that's what one of the activities we do with our students. Well, what is your goal, right? If you don't have a goal, then how are we going to know if you've achieved anything? Okay, then assessing, and then it's almost cyclical because you're making improvements, you're making adjustments, trying it, testing it, and then seeing if it works. If not, then we make an adjustment. Okay. Now, if you think about this equity, right? We talk about equity constantly. If you're strong-minded, or you have a strong mindset, look at the terminology on the right. Culturally responsive, student-centered, informal leadership, take responsibility for success. Or, yeah, all students can succeed. That's the high expectation. Know and understand student population. Access for all, advocates for equity. And on the other side, having a weak educational equity mindset, culturally neutral, teacher-centered, leadership hierarchy, students responsible. This is one that really impacted me too, because I feel a lot of times in education, we always look at our students from a deficit. They don't have this, right? They don't have this. It's the parents aren't involved. The student's not doing this. The student's not doing this. But on that right side, as the educator, what are we doing, right? And in fact, whenever we rewrite our action plans within our goals, because we call them PDPs, it's looking at adult actions and taking responsibility and what can we do to change, not putting it on the student, but what can we do as the adult to change, right? Changing adult behaviors and seeing if it works. Okay. Treat all students the same, and then access for the deserving, and then ignores equity needs. But look at that. And I think that's where one of those areas where, we need to look and be understanding and try to move a little bit more to my right. I think it's your right as well, but moving to the right where it says having a strong mindset for equity. Okay. Well, are there any questions? Any questions maybe in the comment box? Maybe I better check the comment box.
Mr. Deswood?
Yes.
It's Irene Barry. I'm on the equity committee for Aztec High School. And right now we are in the process of writing our action plan for cultural responsive. And is it possible for me to use some of the things out of your PowerPoint because they make sense? We've done a needs assessment already, and so we're trying to put the action plan together, within the next few weeks. And is it possible to contact you to have you review it?
Yes, absolutely. I can take a look at it for you and help you out if you need some assistance. It always helps to have someone else look over something as well. So yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, this is Janet. There's been some wonderful comments happening in the chat, and we probably don't have time to go through all of them, but what I'm hoping is that the attendees have been watching those. There's some really good ideas that people have been placing in there in terms of other ideas to work toward culturally sustaining pedagogies, or whichever term we choose to use. So, but let's go back to questions or comments.
Okay, absolutely. Yes, and I can also share this, the updated PowerPoint. I can download it as a PDF and then send it out.
Thank you, Peter, and I can help to make that available as well. I just want to say I really appreciate your unique perspective. All of your experiences together go into this beautiful sort of integration and this symphony of what you just produced here. So, someone who struggled as as a young person in school, someone who is Danae, someone who has been a high school instructor, a college instructor, has lived in different places across the United States. All of your experiences are so helpful in terms of presenting this information because you have a really holistic view of education and people. So I just want to say I really appreciated that, Peter. There's so much substance to what you just presented for us.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you allowing me to talk and share my experience through this process. And like I was saying, I feel the community college is a really good space for students to develop for for instructors to help students develop those skills, because that, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I learned a lot, and I felt I was able to go out of my comfort zone when I was at Pueblo Community College. You know, it allowed me to understand what my strengths and weaknesses were. And, you know, other than that, I feel like since I went through that process and understand who I was as a learner and how to overcome my disability, I was able to just now to add information. Right now, I feel like I'm just adding information to what I already know. And I think once students are able to connect those schemas, then knowledge starts to just be created. I mean, everything is connected in some way. We just have to find those connections.
Peter, I see a great comment here in the, or quite great question, and I realize we're close to being done with, you know, close to being at the end of time. So if you need to leave the meeting, we totally understand. I'd love to just take a few more minutes to wrap up and answer questions. Chris Crayley's asking, I know a lot of people talk about equity and culturally relevant teaching, but sometimes that seems hollow and does not demonstrate walking the walk. How can that transformation happen? And I think that's the billion-dollar question right now, isn't it? But any quick things that you can say about that, Peter?
Right, absolutely. So I think a lot of times it's, you know, the presentations and this one, you know, valuing our students, taking them for who they are, understanding where they are, and helping them create that knowledge. It's being the teacher that's not going to push the blame and say it's this is why my students are learning. And I think Karen talked about this as well earlier. Whenever, you know, we have to be critical, we have to be honest with ourselves in that reflection and saying, I'm not doing this well. What do I need to do? And you know, constantly reflecting, because you're right. There are a lot of strategies. A lot of these strategies overlap. A lot of these strategies are TESOL strategies or ELL strategies. That's why there was one slide where I said it's just good teaching. But if we're constantly trying to make learning relevant by making it real world, making it, you know, using inquiry-based learning. And I saw someone say, oh, I have my students problem solve. I know Marley comes to me and wants an answer. And I'm like, well, in the real world, it would be problem solve, you know, teaching our students to be problem solvers. Because if you think about it, if you know, content, we can look up content, we can Google content, we can Google facts, right? But teaching our students to become learners, right? And I think that's one way, is if we're teaching students to be lifelong learners, like Chris was saying, like I feel like I'm just a lifelong learner. I want to know stuff. If I want to know stuff, I'm going to seek it. But I was given a framework to look at stuff. I was given a framework to separate information, facts from fiction, right? But given these different strategies to understand who I am, because one strategy won't work, right? Like it was discussed earlier. I think someone said, "Well, I don't like whole group," right? Some of us learn better one-on-one, right? But it's just varying that instruction. So, I mean, is it hard to do? It is really hard, because you might have 20, 25 kids or students in your classroom. But it's finding those individual connections. It may be one thing for one student, but it might be another. That's why it's not, to me, culturally responsive and equity isn't like something you can do quickly. It's a mindset that you have to think about, right? And someone mentioned earlier about having a growth mindset. So if you're having a growth mindset, you're able to do various different things for students. But not only that, but you're not thinking of our students from a deficit, but what do they bring with them, and then highlighting that. It may not even be to the whole class. It may just be having small conversations with students.
And Peter, Mike Hadaba says, love what you just said, that these aren't anything new, or these aren't huge leaps. They're good teaching strategies to begin with. Care about your students and you'll care how you teach them. And I agree, a lot of them are just, they have to do with good, active teaching, you know, engaging students. And it's, so it's, a lot of them aren't humongous changes, but I agree with you that there needs to be that attitude, that thinking change as well.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's like this slide really demonstrates it, right? I mean, you probably fall anywhere on the spectrum, but there's times when you do have to be a little bit more to the left. but it depends on the student and where that learner is. It just depends on that's why earlier in the presentation I said it's knowing your students individually, their strengths and weaknesses, and teaching to their strengths or using their weaknesses and helping them up, pulling them up to where they might not know, or information that they don't know, but building on what they already know.
And Peter, another question, and then we should probably close after this. And I'm asking this question because it's for me, you'll see why it's selfish on my part. This question from another person is, can you come to the CPED sometime or on Zoom for a training on uncovering our biases? And it was one of the questions I was going to ask you. You said you work with your instructors and your students to help to identify our own biases. And we all have biases. There's no way to get around that. And I think, first of all, that's an acknowledgement that we need to help people to make, is that you can't not have biases. You have them. But the goal is, how do we help to reflect and identify those? And of course, hopefully we want people to tell us when they hear us using an implicit bias, but we don't always know, right? So anyway, the question is, we'd love to have you do a training on how to uncover implicit biases. And I know you're a busy person, but that'd be wonderful if sometime in the future you could do that.
Absolutely. I think, I would love to. I think that's part of the process. I mean, you're right. I have biases that I bring with me, right? A lot of times whenever I talk, I say, hey guys, even though there's girls in the classroom. And I mean, my science methods class that I'm teaching, like, they're all ladies, but I use, oh, hey, how are you doing, guys? But I have to be like, Carrie will constantly remind me of a lot of these things, and it does take that. But I mean, there is a training that I put my staff through, and I tell you, let me give you an example of that, right? There's certain rules within at least K-12, right? And I'll use a specific example, that dress code, right? There's this dress code. Well, that girl is wearing this really tight, whatever. Okay, and I have to constantly ask my teacher, is that your personal opinion, or is that your bias? And I have to always tell my teacher, is that your bias? Or is that the student? Are those your values or what? Right? So once we start having that conversation, then we can have that and be reflective on that. But it always comes down to understanding what my biases are. Right. And there is a lot of research out there that, uncovering that. There's one book, actually, I just read it last month, which is what is it? White Fragility. Right. That was one book that I read that I was like, wow, there was some really good information in there for understanding our biases and the impact that we bring within our classrooms. I
just read that book too, Peter, and it just absolutely blew me away. It was fantastic.
It's just a different perspective, right? It helped me. I mean, it really helped me understand some things as well, because I mean, even as a building leader, I bring these set of biases in with me as well. But here's the thing too. I feel sometimes those biases are good, right? Because it's a starting point to create that discussion, to talk about it. Because if we're not talking about and having these tough discussions, we're not going to get anywhere. Right? Then people are going to be afraid to share. People are going to share their opinions. And I think one of the things we really talk about in my building is creating that safe space, creating that community, so people do feel comfortable to share. And
I totally agree. Yes. Peter, I want to say thank you so much. If you could just go ahead and stop share, we'll just do a really fast wrap up and thank you and a goodbye. And so I appreciate all of you so much. And Peter, thank you so much for the presentation. It was fantastic. A lot of people are asking if we can share the PowerPoint, and absolutely, Peter will give me an updated version of it, and I will make sure I get it to you. And I want to thank all of you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to follow-up conversations. If you would please fill out the evaluation that I emailed to you. And if you have any topics that you would like for the CPED to arrange in the near future, that's a great place to give us some ideas. A place to give us ideas for next year for the conference. And I think that's all I have. Any final closing comments or questions before we all move on and enjoy our Saturday afternoon?